Hi students, welcome to lesson number 6, Child Labour. Introduction. Child labour is one of the most crucial social problems in India. Child labour is both an exploitative economic practice as well as a deep-rooted social evil. Child labourers are exploited, exposed to hazardous work conditions and paid very low wages for their long hours of work. They are forced to forego education and have to support their family income by working as labourers. According to ILO report on child labour in India, the maximum number of children, around 48%, are employed in manufacturing sector, followed by agriculture, forestry and fishing 20%, and wholesale, retail, trade, small scale industries and restaurants, it is around 32%. Child labour is inextricably linked to bonded labour. Child bonded labourers are found in large numbers in the states of Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Odisha and Assam. Now let us discuss about the objectives of this lesson. The specific objectives of this lesson are as follows. Number 1, to discuss about the nature and extent of child labour in India. Number 2, to discuss about the legislative measures initiated by the Government of India to prevent and eradicate the problem of child labour in India. Third one, to discuss about the preventive measures initiated by the Government of India and state governments to eliminate the problem of child labour in India. Nature and extent of child labour in India. As per the Child and Adolescent Labour Prohibition and Regulation Act 1986, which was amended in 2016, a child is defined as any person below the age of 14, and the CLPR Act prohibits employment of a child in any employment, including as a domestic help. It is a cognizable criminal offence to employ a child for any work. Children between age of 14 years and 18 years are defined as adolescent, and the laws allow adolescent to be employed except in the listed hazardous occupation and processes, which include mining, inflammable substance and explosives related work, and any other hazardous process as per the Factories Act 1948. In 2001, an estimated of 1% of all child workers, or about 1,20,000 children in India, were in a hazardous industries. The term child labour is often defined as work that deprives children of their childhood, their potential and their dignity, and that is harmful to physical and mental development. It refers to work that is mentally, physically, socially or morally dangerous and harmful to children, and or interferes with a child's ability to attend and participate in school fully by obliging them to leave school prematurely, or requiring them to attempt to combine school attendance with excessively long and heavy work. There are many interrelated factors contributing to the prevalence of child labor. Child labor is both a cause consequence of poverty. Household poverty forces children into the labor market to earn money. Some perform child labor to supplement family income, while many also are in it for survival. They miss out on an opportunity to gain an education, further perpetuating household poverty across a generations, slowing the economic growth and social development. Child labor impedes children from gaining the skills and education they need to have opportunities of decent work as an adult. Inequality, lack of educational opportunities, slow demographic transition, traditions and cultural expectations all contribute to the persistence of child labor in India. Age, sex, ethnicity, caste and deprivation affect the type, intensity of work that children perform. Agriculture and informal sector employment continue to be sectors where children end up working. The ILO experience is that stable economic growth, respect for labor standards, decent work, universal education, social protection, recognizing the needs and rights of the children together help tackle the root causes of child labor. As per Census 2011, the total child population in India in the age group of 5 to 14 years is 259.6 million. Of these, 10.1 million, that means 3.9% of total child population are working, either as main worker or as marginal worker. In addition, more than 42.7 million children in India are out of school. In addition to the constitutional prohibition of child labor, various laws in India such as the Juvenile Justice Care and Protection of Children Act 2000 and the Child Labor Prohibition and Abolition Act 1986 provide a basis in law to identify, prosecute and stop child labor in India. The term child labor suggests ILO is best defined as work that deprives children of their childhood, their potential and their dignity, and that is harmful to physical and mental development, which interferes with their schooling by depriving them of the opportunity to attend school, obliging them to leave school prematurely or requiring them to attempt to combine school attendance with excessively long and heavy work. India's Census 2001 defines child labor as participation of a child less than 17 years of age in any economically productive activity with or without compensation, wages or profit. Such participation could be physical or mental or both. This work includes part-time help or unpaid work on the farm, family enterprise or in any other economic activity such as cultivation and milk production for sale or domestic consumption. Indian government classifies child laborers into two groups. Main workers are those who work 6 months or more per year. and marginal child workers are those who work at any time during the year but less than 6 months in a year. Some child rights activists argue that child labor must include every child who is not in school because he or she is a hidden child worker. UNICEF, however, points out that India faces major shortages of schools, classrooms and teachers, particularly in rural areas where 90% of child labor problem is observed. About 1 in 5 primary schools have just one teacher to teach students across all grades. After independence, India has passed a number of constitutional protections and laws on child labor. The Constitution of India in the Fundamental Rights and the Directive Principles of State Policy prohibits child labor below the age of 14 years in any factory or mine or castle or engaged in any other hazardous employment. This is according to Article 24 of Indian Constitution. The Constitution also envisioned that India shall provide infrastructure and resources for free and compulsory education to all children of the age 6 to 14 years. This is according to Article 21A and Article 45 of the Indian Constitution. Now let us discuss about the causes of child labor in India. For much of human history and across different cultures, children less than 18 years old have contributed to family welfare in a variety of ways. UNICEF suggests that poverty is the biggest cause of child labor. The report also notes that in rural and impoverished parts of developing and underdeveloped parts of the world, children have no real and meaningful alternative. Schools and also teachers are unavailable. Child labor is the unnatural result. A BBC report similarly concludes poverty and inadequate public education infrastructure are some of the causes of child labor in India. Between boys and girls, UNICEF finds girls are 2 times more likely to be out of school and working in a domestic role. Parents with limited resources, claims UNICEF, have to choose whose school costs and fees they can afford when a school is available. Educating girls tends to be a lower priority across the world, including India. Many girls are kept from school or drop out, then provide child labor. The International Labour Organization suggests that poverty is the greatest single force driving children into the workplace. Income from a child's work is felt to be crucial for his or her own survival or for that of the household. For some families, income from their children's labor is between 25 and 40% of the household income. According to a 2008 study by ILO, among the most important factors driving children to harmful labor is the lack of availability and quality of schooling. Many communities, particularly rural areas, do not possess adequate school facilities. Even when schools are sometimes available, they are too far away. difficult to reach, unaffordable, or the quality of education is so poor that parents wonder if going to school is really worthwhile. The main causes of child labor can be explained as follows. Number 1, the social scientists say that the main cause of child labor is poverty. The children either supplement their parents' income or are the only wage earners in the family. Number 2, small children are pledged to the money lenders due to grinding poverty, and it gives worst form of child labor in the form of bonded child labor. Poor parents find it difficult to take care of children due to lack of resources, and child labor is used as a survival strategy by poorer households. Number 3, another reason is that child labor is deliberately created by vested interests to get cheap labor. Number 4, child labor also has a gender dimension. Girls are more prone to be forced into child labor. Education of the girl children is also neglected in patriarchal families, and it paves way for their early employment as child labor. Fifth, large family size leads to depletion of meager incomes of earning hands, and children are pushed into labor. Sixth point, vulnerability of children is also a cause, as they rarely protest and are even considered as suitable for certain works like carpet weaving and bangle industry. Seventh, poor welfare and social security measures taken by the state, poor wages of adult parents, small uneconomic land holdings of the parents also lead to the problem of child labor. Eighth point, poor legal framework and lack of preventive measures also lead to instances of child labor. Ninth point, child labor is more prevalent in certain areas where vulnerable sections like scheduled castes and scheduled tribes have higher concentration. These causes are compounded by systematic failure of government to provide minimum social security net to parents of children who are forced to put their children into child labor. Administrative and civil society apathy and corruption is also to be blamed equally. Non-implementation of universal education agenda has forced millions of children into work. Lack of education and empowerment put the children into a vicious circle of illiteracy and poverty. Working conditions of child laborers. Children work in dangerously polluted factories whose brick walls are scarred with soot, black powder in smoke, and there is an oppressive smell in the air. They work near furnaces which burn at a temperature of 1400 centigrade degrees. They handle dangerous chemicals like arsenic and potassium. They work in glass bowling units where the work exerts their lungs and creates diseases like tuberculosis. A large number of the child workers are virtually confined in small rooms under inhuman conditions and in the most unhygienic surroundings. Most of these children come from extremely poor households. They are either school dropouts or have not seen any school at all. They earn a very meager wage and work in most unsafe conditions. The hazardous conditions take their toll. Children suffer from lung diseases, tuberculosis, eye diseases, asthma, bronchitis and backaches. Some are injured in fire accidents. Many become unemployable even at the age of 20. If injured or incapacitated, they are discarded mercilessly by their employers. Social legislations for the prevention of child labour. India has a federal form of government, and labour being a subject in the concurrent list, both the central and state governments can and have legislated on child labour. The major national legislative developments include the following. Number 1, the Factories Act of 1948. The Act prohibits the employment of children below the age of 14 years in any factory. The law also placed rules on who, when and how long can pre-adults aged 15 to 18 years be employed in any factory. Number 2, the Mines Act of 1952. The Act prohibits the employment of children below 18 years of age in a mine. Next one, the Child and Adolescent Labour Prohibition and Regulation Act of 1986. A child is defined as any person below the age of 14 years, and the CLPR Act prohibits employment of a child in any employment, including as a domestic help, except helping own family in non-hazardous occupations. It is a cognizable criminal offence to employ a child for any work. Children between the age of 14 and 18 are defined as adolescent, and the law allows adolescent to be employed except in the listed hazardous occupation and processes, which include mining, inflammable substance and explosives related work, and any other hazardous process as per the Factories Act 1948. Next one is the Juvenile Justice Care and Protection of Children Act of 2015. This law made it a crime punishable with a prison term for anyone to keep a child in bondage for the purpose of employment. Next one is the Right of Children to Free and Compulsory Education Act of 2009. The law mandates free and compulsory education to all children aged 6 to 14 years. This legislation also mandated that 25% of seats in every private school must be allocated for children from economically disadvantaged groups. India formulated a national policy on child labour in 1987. This policy seeks to adopt a gradual and sequential approach with a focus on rehabilitation of children working in hazardous occupations. It envisioned strict enforcement of Indian laws on child labour combined with development programs to address the root causes of child labour, such as poverty. In 1988, this led to the National Child Labour Project initiative. This legal and development initiative continues with a current central government funding of rupees 6 billion targeted solely to eliminate child labour in India. Despite these efforts, child labour remains a major challenge for India. No child below the age of 14 years shall be employed to work in any factory or mine or engaged in any hazardous employment. Initiatives against child labour in India. The problem of child labour continues to pose a big challenge before the Indian nation. The government has been taking various proactive measures to tackle this problem. However, considering the magnitude and extent of the problem and that it is essentially a socio-economic problem inextricably linked to poverty and illiteracy, it requires concerted efforts from all sections of the society to make a dent in the problem. Over the years, the Government of India has multiplied its efforts to address the needs and rights of exploited children. Way back in 1979, the central government formed the first committee called 𝗂𝗽𝗓 Committee to study the issue of child labour and to suggest measures to tackle it. Committee examined the problem in detail and made some far-reaching recommendations. It observed that as long as poverty continued, it would be difficult to totally eliminate child labour, and hence any attempt to abolish it through legal recourse would not be a practical proposition. The committee felt that in the circumstances, the only alternative left was to ban child labour in hazardous areas and to regulate and ameliorate the conditions of work in other areas. It recommended that a multiple policy approach was required in dealing with the problems of working children. Based on the recommendations of 𝗂𝗽𝗓 Committee, the Child Labour Prohibition and Regulation Act was enacted in 1986. The Act prohibits employment of children in certain specified hazardous occupations and processes and regulates the working conditions in others. The list of hazardous occupations and processes is progressively being expanded on the recommendation of Child Labour Technical Advisory Committee constituted under the Act. In consonance with the Child Labour Prohibition and Regulation Act, a national policy on child labour was formulated in 1987. The policy seeks to adopt a gradual and sequential approach with a focus on rehabilitation of children working in hazardous occupations and processes. The Ministry of Labour and Employment had implemented around 100 industry-specific national child labour projects to rehabilitate the child workers since 1988. The Indian government has enacted a plethora of acts, laws, organizations and institutions to combat the overwhelming prominence of child labour. Some of the initiatives include the Child Labour Prohibition and Regulation Act, which is a piece of legislation that prohibits the engagement of children in certain employment, mostly in dangerous conditions and regulates the conditions of work of children. The national policy on child labour seeks to adopt a sequential approach with focus on rehabilitation of children working in hazardous occupations and processes in the first instance, and the Ministry of Labour and Employment functions to provide and supervise a range of policies concerning child labour in India. Furthermore, NGOs such as Care India, Child Rights and You, Global March Against Child Labour have been implemented several measures to combat child labour through education and accessibility to resources. Many NGOs like 𝗪𝗺𝗺 𝗪𝗪𝗺 𝗪𝗪𝗺, Child Fund, Care India, Talash Association, Child Rights and You, Global March Against Child Labour, Ride India, Child Line, etc. have been working to eradicate the child labour in India. Summary. Thus, the governments have accordingly been taking proactive steps to tackle this problem through strict enforcement of legislative provisions along with simultaneous rehabilitative measures. State governments which desire the appropriate implementing authorities have been conducting regular inspections and raids to detect cases of violations. Since poverty is the root cause of this problem and enforcement alone cannot help solve it, the governments have been laying a lot of emphasis on the rehabilitation of these children and on improving the economic conditions of their families. The only way to ensure compliance with the Act is to make punishment for violation more stringent and incorporate a provision for surprise checks and establish a separate vigilance cell. With regard to the workers' interest, it should be made mandatory for all employers to take steps for the intellectual, vocational and educational well-being and upliftment of a child worker, whether one is employed as a factory hand, a domestic servant or a shop assistant. In this context, the impact of policies which may not be specifically addressed to children but which try to alleviate poverty and inequality can have a significant and even decisive impact. Such policies may include agrarian reforms, employment generation schemes, dissemination of improved technology among the poor, promotion of the informal sector and creation of cooperatives and social security programs. Laws and regulations must be backed by effective enforcement machinery.